Hey there, folks. This is Riley Holland, and I'm here today talking to Michael Melville, dream consultant and author of the Dreamcoat blog. Michael, it's good to have you.
Well, it's good to be here.
So I met Michael Melville, I guess it was a couple years ago now, in Ojai, California. I had been living there for a while. I was just about to leave the state, and serendipitously ran into Michael at a cafe. We started talking. We were amongst friends, mutual friends, and before long, the conversation drifted to dreams, because Michael, you had that dream group. Do you still have the dream group in Ojai too? Do you do the classes?
Yes,
Right.
yes, I do. I have it on the second Thursday of every month in Ojai.
There you go. So if you guys are in
It's been
Ojai,
going for about 4 years.
nice,
Yeah.
very cool. So yeah, so we were talking and I've been a pretty heavy dreamer my whole life, and it's played a pretty big role in the way that I see myself. And I thought I knew a few things about dreams. You know, I'd read Carl Jung, I'd read this and that, but when we were talking, and I remember I had just had a really vivid dream, and I described it to you, Michael, and I remember your response was, first of all, very, very respectful. I remember you asked if I really wanted to
Mm-hmm.
hear what you had to say, and I did, and what you said was so spot on, but spot on in a way that was also surprising. It was also novel, which is to say something that I hadn't thought of, and yet immediately resonated as, oh, of course, that it really stuck with me. And as a matter of fact, I think you might remember this, I was there with another friend who didn't know you,
Yes,
and he had overheard what we were
yes.
talking about, right? And he knew me, of course, he knows me, and he knew what was going on in my life at the time, and he was hearing what we were talking about. And later, when I talked to him about it, I found that he had just assumed that you and I had known each other for a really long time, and you were giving me advice about what was going on in my life at the time. Little did he know it was just this dream that had sparked your intuition and unfurled this interpretation that just really hit me to the core. And that was the beginning of a very dear friendship, and also continuing to talk about dreams and my dreams, and continuing to get these sharp insights about a very personal and intimate side of life. So what I wanted to talk about in this interview is, how did you get started in your engagement with the dream world that eventually brought you to this level of, I would call it mastery of real understanding? What was the spark that got this whole thing going for you?
No, that's a really good question, because I had really intense dreams as a child, which they're the kind of dreams that I later discovered that a shaman would have in a previous culture 400, 500 years ago, where if I'd had those kind of dreams living in a culture, Native American culture, for example, 400 years ago, I would have been trained as a shaman, because those are the kind of dreams I was having. But I didn't have anyone to talk to about my dreams. I had no one, so I was kind of stuck with this strange. I was in this kind of a strange place, and so I had to kind of tuck that back on the shelf until I went to Dartmouth College, and part of believe it or not, the political science, the reading list, was this book by Carl Jung, a short book called The Undiscovered Self. And that got implanted in me that there was such a thing as a collective unconscious. And after getting a degree in philosophy and becoming a college professor and teaching ethics and symbolic logic and other very intellectual linear kinds of things, the dreams started coming back. The dreams have always been there, but they started coming back like they had been when I was young. And it really got me upset. It was somewhat disturbing for my family as well. And so I went for my sabbatic leave. I went to study at the Jung Institute in Los Angeles. I had excellent teachers. Malcolm Dana, who was dying of liver cancer at the time. I was his last student. And Russ Lockhart, who was teaching at the UCLA Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry at the time. And Malcolm said he could analyze my dreams, but he couldn't help me with the Jungian, the academic stuff. And so he recommended that I study with Russ at the same time. And so I did that, and that was like the roller coaster. I started out thinking I was going to do an academic project as a philosopher, and suddenly wound up in this in the underworld. We're dealing with images and all kinds of things, and what happened there, because I've been interested in imagery for a long time, was I was sharing my dreams every week with Malcolm, who was a friend of Anais Nin and knew all these wonderful people. It was just really exciting studying with him. But after a while, he started treating me like a colleague, and even began sharing his dreams with me, because he was dying and he wanted to get feedback. So one day I said, "Well, why are you doing this? I'm the student here." And he said, "Oh, I can tell from your dreams that you're an extraordinary person, and you have abilities that perhaps you don't understand, but I recognize them, and the dream world does. And so that's why I'm sharing them, because you have a gift that's a very unusual gift." And I thought, that's pretty trippy. So that's where the initial impetus started. And then the following year, I was recognized by another old man who was about to die. His name was Mialo. He was a Papago, keeper of the sacred smoke for his people. And he recognized me as the teacher of the stories of life. Now, in their tradition, the thing that I do, I tell a lot of stories about life's experiences. And I was teaching at the college at the time, and I would tell these stories about, true stories about people's lives that had a psychological impact. And so that came along, and then that's just been continuing since 1979. And I've been studying, Carl Jung and dream work, and I've been exploring that all my life now. But that's how it all got sparked.
Interesting. So for some people listening, and maybe for the average person who maybe has some dreams here and there, maybe a few nightmares they remember, it might be difficult to imagine how a person's dream life could be so disruptive, as you said, to yourself and even to your family. Can you describe a little bit more about what was happening in those early dreams that made them so dramatic and made you feel like, hey, this is something that I really have to engage with deeply?
Well, I think that as a child, I grew up in a family. My parents were alcoholics, and this was a long process. And the way I adapted to this disease that eventually killed them was to go into my head. And I was all in my head, and it was very intellectual. And so when you get so out of balance that you kind of live in your head, the body will try to balance that out. And one of the ways that what dreams do, this is one of the things that Jung discovered, is that they compensate. So whatever you've got going on in your daily life, there's going to be an opposite appearing in the dream world. And the more intensely focused on rationality, reasonableness, ethics, philosophy, that's what I was teaching. Well, I had some kind of a life with my family, but I was spending a lot of it in my head. And so my dreams then would compensate, and I'd have these incredible emotional, chaotic, super sensual, sexual, bizarre kind of dreams that were like as intensely off base and off balance from my core personality as my waking life was. So waking up in the morning, if I remembered the dream, I would write it down, and I'd be puzzled about it, because there was my overall organism, if you want to look at it that way, the unconscious part of me was desperately trying to get my attention and help me to get back into balance, because I was so far out of balance. And then, of course, because I was so far out of balance, I would experience these interactions with people that they'd be so strange. I mean, I would be projecting attitudes that people might have towards me, whether they were positive or negative, and I would be having all of these things happening in my regular life, which they didn't really fit together the way they should have, and I had learned intellectually about projection, that we project unconscious contents onto other people, but I hadn't experienced it like this before. And in fact, one of the things that happened during that time was I was in the kitchen with my two best friends, another colleague from the college, and my wife and his wife. And my wife said something to me, and I really took offense, and I snapped at her. And my friends and they all said, "Well, Michael, why did you say that?" And I said, "Well, you said blah, blah, blah." And she said, "No, I didn't. I didn't say that." And I said, I knew that she'd said it, because I had heard her say it, and I was really angry with her for saying it. It was like so degrading to, like a slap in the face. But my friends said to me, "No, Michael, that's not what she said." And then they repeated what she had said, exactly what she had said she'd said. And I thought, well, that's really strange. I would swear on Bibles that she'd said that, but I believed them, and so it's 3 against 1 here. Well, how could this possibly be happening? And so I wrote down the expression, and then I listened, to the 2 different ways. And when I realized that there was a rhythm in my wife's sentence, that I could easily superimpose what I heard her say on that rhythm. And that's how I realized that it was me. That was my mean and nasty feminine that was reflected right back at me. And I was using my wife to be the vehicle to interact with. And I had to stop and say to myself, whoa, I am really in need of some help here.
So it sounds like you found yourself in a situation where you really had to look into it, dig deeper.
Yes.
So let's talk, for those who aren't necessarily familiar with some of these ideas here. You mentioned 2 things so far that the unconscious, you'd say your unconscious, does to prevent, I'd say, the personality from becoming too one-sided. So you're all off in your head, responding to your early experiences that had put you off in your head. And so first of all, your dreams were balancing this out, or trying to balance it out by being more extreme. But not just your dreams, it was actually happening in daily life. And I think that that's something that people don't necessarily realize is happening, that the unconscious will play that kind of drama out in their own daily lives. Do you find that that's that type of projection that you described is a common thing for people to be living in?
Oh yes, it's very common. In fact, that's what's so amusing in a way, is it's so common that that when it's happening, you have no idea it's happening until unless, let me put it that way, until and unless you start looking at, like, the data, if you want to call it that. Somebody's being extremely like affectionate and hitting on me, and they're flirting with me, and they're doing things to get my attention, and maybe I'm feeling uncomfortable with this. And then over a period, if you know this person over a period of time, and you realize that, well, now most of the time that's not the case. So why is it that suddenly there's a sexual overtone here? What's going on with that? And if you take a look at it, sometimes what you realize is that this person's just like a movie screen who has a lot of qualities that your own internal psychic dimension can project out onto. And in a case like for example, if you're having a lot of feminine attraction, and this is popping up for you, kind of, well, one way you can say is, oh, well, I'm such a good-looking guy, and I'm so handsome, and I have all these wonderful qualities, and of course these women are interested in me. But if you to be a little more humble about things like that is, I'm a married man, I'm a father of 4 children, I'm a college professor, and, well, of course there's going to be situations where people are going to interact with me in ways that I'm going to be experienced as a sexual object, I suppose. But looking at the kind of women and the kind of interactions that were happening for me, I had to take a look at that and realizes that these are a lot of my own internalized feminine qualities, things that I had learned about being around my mother and my grandmother and my aunties, my teachers. Almost all of them in public school growing up in Idaho were feminine. They were all women for the most part. And that there was a sort of like an internalized composite of all of these women. And that's what I was experiencing coming on to me. And why? Well, they're all people like my mom, when it comes right down to it. People who were frustrated because they weren't creative in the ways that they wanted to be, that they couldn't do the kinds of things that they wanted to do. Like, my mom wanted to be a dancer like Isadora Duncan, and she wanted to write like Ernest Hemingway. And very interestingly enough, I would get these interactions with women who were dancers, who were creative writers. They wrote poetry. They're very creative folks. And sometimes they would be painters, who would express themselves in the plastic or visual arts. But those were the main people who would hit on me, if you want to look at it that way. And it got me thinking about, well, maybe there's a part of me that isn't having expression here. Maybe I'm the one who should be writing, literature or stories, or I should be dancing. Maybe this is maybe this is stuff that it's a part of me that I need to be doing. And so that's where I began to take those projections back and realize, yeah, well, I do love to write. And that's basically what I've done in my 50s and 60s, is I've started writing. And I go dancing. I like to folk dance. I like to Greek dance. There's a period I was doing dance improv in my 50s. So all of these things that I internalized from my mother and my other relatives, I guess, is the other teachers from the culture, they were part of my unconscious, my feminine side anyway. And then, of course, the same is true for the masculine side. There's all those aspects of me that I did not want to be like my dad, because he disappointed us. You know, he would leave for long periods of time. I'd feel abandoned. He was warm and affectionate and loving and kind and generous and fabulous when he was home, until I hit puberty. And then all of a sudden there was distancing, and all these other beautiful things about him stopped. And I immediately thought it was me. You know, I must have done something wrong. What could I do to make it better? And so that part of me that was abandoning, distancing, rejecting, I'm cool, those were parts of me that I kind of stuffed into my closet because I didn't want to be like that. So we would call that the shadow aspect. Everybody has to stuff certain things in the closet because your family doesn't like it. Your teachers don't like it. You know, the culture doesn't like it. And so you repress or suppress those qualities, but they're there, you know, because they were there when I was a child, you know, and they just became inappropriate during certain times. And then these get projected out into the environment, or I start acting unconsciously in ways like my dad did. I think the most telling one was when I was substitute teaching for a colleague at Mendocino College he was taking alternative cancer therapy, and he had to go out of state because it wasn't legal in California. And he was only going to be gone for 2 weeks, but he didn't come back for the whole semester. So I wound up teaching all of his courses and mine. And there was this kid who was a teaching assistant who just kept hanging around my office. He wasn't my assistant. He was a colleague in English. But he just would hang out and want to talk. And for a long time, he was a nice boy. I liked him. And then when the semester was over, he asked me if, you know, could he have a copy of this poem that was on my door because he really liked it. And I just wanted to get rid of him, right? So I just gave him the paper and I said, here, you can have it. And, you know, I didn't realize at the time what I was doing. I was just being me. And it was the end of the semester, and it was the end of my relationship with him, and that was that. And I wasn't reading the body language, and he wasn't telling me verbally anything, but he was telling me tons if I was just able to listen to it. But I wasn't listening because I had this pattern. The semester's over, the relationship's over, I probably won't see this kid again, and it's over. It was, you know, nice while it lasted. And then about 9 months later, I had a job with the Pomo Indians in the community there. I was an after-school education specialist, and I was driving a bunch of these Indian kids home after this experience. And this boy, the teaching assistant, he was walking the same direction we were with his back to us. And as I crossed the intersection, he turned around, made a 180-degree turn, made eye contact with me, and he acknowledged me. I acknowledged him, and I drove through. And this Indian boy who was behind me said, who was that? And I said, oh, just a student from the college. And this kid said, oh, yeah, right. And I thought, well, you little monster. You know, whatever. And then I thought, yeah, that is kind of strange, isn't it? How did that happen? So it was 2 weeks after this episode of seeing him, and it was graduation, and I was dressed up in my black gown and my mortarboard and all that with all the rest of the faculty for the graduation. And this young man came in, and it was like in a gymnasium. So he goes to the top, very tippy top, and starts scanning the entire audience. And since I was noticing him come in, I kept watching him. And as soon as he scanned and hit me, we locked eyes. And at that point, he didn't stop looking at me. It was like a really direct, connection. And afterwards, at the reception, I went up to him and I said, I noticed that, we connected there. You were looking, you're scanning the audience. And when you stopped right at me. And so what I was wondering is that, when I gave you the poem and I kind of brushed you off, were you asking for a relationship with me? Did you want to have a relationship? Is that what was going on there? And he said, yeah, that's what was going on. And he said, I was just too afraid to say anything because I was always rejected by my dad and all my mother's lovers and my stepfathers. And so I just couldn't say it. And I said, gee, I am so sorry that I did that to you. I swore I would never do that kind of thing to anyone because that's what my dad did to me. And I realized at that point that I'd made an unconscious pattern conscious. And so I was really feeling good about that, but I was also feeling bad that I had rejected this person. And as it turned out, of course, I welcomed him into my world, and he later became a teaching assistant at the tutorial center for me, and I got to be with him all the time, like 4 days a week, which is what he wanted, and it was really good for me too. So all that worked out.
So it sounds like this idea of projection describes a lot of how, and I think it's a really common problem for people where they'll sabotage themselves or they'll find themselves just doing the exact things that they say that they're never ever going to do, like you did with what you said you'd never do what your father had done. And it sounds like in this
Right.
particular case, you almost got lucky, right? Like your other friend pointed out that this guy wanted a relationship, and that started you noticing what was going on. But it seems like there's also just a terrible catch-22 with the nature of projection, which is that it's invisible. If you only are seeing your interpretations, your projections, then
right.
How do you see behind the curtain? How do you get past all that?
Well, you don't get past it in the present moment. When it's happening, it's just happening, and you're experiencing people in a particular way. And unless you have, another person sitting there beside you or experiencing the same event together, there isn't any way out. Because you have your subjective experience, and that's the way it is. That's the way I experienced it. And if there's no witness to this event, there's no way of balancing it out. And so that's where the dreams come in, because normally we're stuck in this subjective experience. And so Jung told this very famous example of this. He had a client, and basically he did not like her, and he had a dream. And in this dream, she was elevated above him, looking down at him, and he would have to look up at her. And when he woke up from the dream, he realized that what he'd been doing is looking down at her in therapy sessions, that he regarded her as not very capable, a typical woman. I mean, this is late 19th century, early 20th century when this happened. In fact, it's even suggested that this woman was probably Maria Montessori. She's the lady with the umbrella, because she did consult Jung. Oh. But in any case, whether that was her or not, he doesn't indicate who she was. But what he does say is that he told her the dream. And she said, well, it's very interesting you had that dream, because I was coming here to end the therapy with you because I felt that you weren't connecting with me. You were talking down to me. You weren't connecting with me as a human, person to person. And I was not going to continue having that kind of relationship. But now that you realized and your dream told you what you were doing, I'm willing to continue. See, so
Interesting.
that's how the dream told it.
Interesting.
And a lot of times that we're like the dream will you may be doing something in your dream that that you don't do in real life. And if you ask these people, like maybe they're skiing or they're swimming or there's some kind of an activity, in the dream world, and you ask them, well, oh, do you like to ski? Oh yeah, I love to ski. Well, when's the last time you went skiing? Oh, 40 years ago. And you say, well, really? And they say, yeah, I just don't have time for it. It's, I thought it's to this or that, and they're living right there, like in San Francisco, they could get to Tahoe really easy and go skiing, but for 40 years they've not gone. And then you ask them things like, well, why? Wouldn't it be fun? I mean, in your dream, you're having a lot of fun. You're skiing with other people, and describe how it felt. And then they'll describe how exhilarating, how fun it was, how beautiful the scenery, and it reconnected them with their youth, or whatever. They really enjoyed it. And then, but they're depressed in their ordinary everyday life, and so they've come to see me because they don't know how to get out of this depression, right? I said, well, here's a prescription. Have you tried going skiing? Oh, well, I do it. And then they'll give you all the reasons they can't go. And you say, well, I mean, you don't have the money. Oh, well, no. And you don't have the time. Well, I could make the time, and you don't have the equipment. Well, I could rent the equipment. And I said, so you don't have the transportation. Oh, well, no, I could, no, and there's no place to stay. No, well, I could rent so, and they finally realized that there's nothing keeping them from doing this, except that there's this they have this idea about who they are, right? The conscious personality isn't seeing himself as somebody who's frivolous enough to just go skiing for the weekend just because he felt like it, because he has work to do, or maybe he's a doctor, whatever. And you keep pushing and saying, well, why not? Your dream is a compensation. There's something wrong here. Why don't you try it? Well, then they do it. They go off and have their ski weekend. And then they come back. And they're glowing, right? The depression's lifted for some strange reason. It's funny, but the organism, the body knows what it needs. And it's trying to give us these dreams so that we can give it what it wants and what it needs. But the conscious personality has to agree. It's got the money. It's got the bank book. Right? It has to buy the tickets.
Yeah, so I'm starting to get kind of the picture of, as you describe how these mechanisms work really clearly, how on that day 2 years ago you were able to tell me so much about myself just by hearing the language of the dream without knowing practically anything about me. Seems if you can see how these mechanisms work and sort of carry the message over, then you're helping to play that role. I'm curious, what motivates you as when you're working with someone on their dreams? What makes you want to keep going back into that side of life and being that representative for people?
Well, it's magic. I mean, it's like it's so exciting to see someone who's extremely troubled with what they think are external problems. They have a very difficult situation from their family of origin. They, for years didn't realize why they ran off to India to live with a guru for 12 years, and then they come back, and then they have all these activities and and they're beginning to have flashbacks, and so they're beginning to realize that whatever it was that they did didn't work, but they have dreams, And, and then they hear, this guy, Michael Melville, is giving this lecture on dream work. And I did that in the World University there in Ojai. And this person came up to me, and she'd had a dream. And she asked me, she told me the dream. And I said, well, I gave her my explanation of the dream. And she, on the basis of that, she started working with me. And watching her grow over a period of time, and this is one of the most wounded people I've ever met in my life, and it's just almost unimaginable what this little girl had to endure as a child and how she compensated. And nobody was willing to acknowledge her family of origin. They were into a religious tradition of Christian Science and just denied there was nothing wrong. It's all in your mind. You dreamt it. These things actually happened to her, but she couldn't, because she was told it wasn't real. She then could not remember it. So she dissociated. So when she was being abused, she was in a dissociated state. And literally, that wasn't what happening to her. So throughout her whole life, it wasn't until I think she got into her late 40s and early 50s that she started having flashbacks of what had happened to her. So in the dream world, she would bring these dreams to me, and just watching how she would grow. For example, in the beginning, there were these very dark characters, very sadistic, dark murderers, burglars, torturers, really horrible situations that she'd find herself in the dream, and she couldn't get out of. Well, talking about this over a period of time, she began, then the dreams there were these really dark, sinister people, but she was able to elude them, and then eventually she was able to pick up a phone and call the police, and then eventually she was able to say to them, stop. Well, it was pretty obvious from her family of origin history who these dark people were. And by working with these dreams over a period of time, it's like the shadow side of the masculine in this case, which was a composite of most of the men she'd have relationships with, but essentially put there by her father. And then, strangely enough, not really strangely at all the men she's attracted to, all the men she wants to marry, all the men she wants to make love to, all the men she's involved with fit into this bad boy archetypal sort of way where she gets abused, defrauded, betrayed. I mean, they're just over and over and over and over. And then her guru, the one she runs away to live with, is discovered to be a pedophile later on, after she's been there for a long time, and she's horrified, right? But the point I'm making here is that she's beginning to draw the connection that the original pedophile in her life was her father. But because of death threats and all kinds of things, she couldn't acknowledge the existence of this storyline. But it was in the dream world, and it was all over the place in the dream world. So we could talk about the dreams, which kept the little girl, who'd actually experienced these things, safe, because we're talking about dream images. And this, I was so excited watching this person grow, but also seeing how the dreams they make it very, very clear exactly what the problem is, how things are progressing, what needs to happen next. And so they're like kind of magic or spiritually divine disclosures to me, and I feel so honored that this woman trusts me, and that the dream world trusts me, and that I'm able to do an interaction. It's kind of like a dance, sort of, with her, of what is going on, in the dream world, and how it might be played out in her real life experience, which of course it is being played out in her real life experience, because what's happening? Well, all these guys that she's meeting, she's projecting this father image onto, and then of course she's attracted and repulsed, and these strange and unusual things happen with these men. So the projection's still taking place in the real world. It's being dramatized in the dream world, and then I get a chance to interact with both of these worlds, so to speak, and the conscious personality, until finally at some point the inner child starts to come to the surface. And because she's the one who's wounded. And the only way this little girl is ever going to feel safe in the world is if the adult person, her mommy, is able to keep her safe, which her biological mother was not able to do. In fact, her biological mother denied that anything was happening, even though the little girl tried to tell her what Daddy was doing to her. But Mom didn't believe it. So the pattern just keeps, it just keeps recurring. But the beautiful thing about working with dreams is that these people begin to get it, that they are projecting, that it's an inner attitude towards men, an inner attitude towards being a victim. And then, so if you're a victim, you need an abuser. So who do you get attracted to sexually? Abusive men. How strange. I mean, duh. But, and it's the same way with men and women, They have, these women will show up in these guys' dreams who are very seductive, or they're very beautiful, or they're whatever, and you start talking to them and you discover that that's their feminine, that's how they are, but they're behaving in these seductive ways with the women they're attracted to, and they're competing with their wives or their lovers as if they were a woman, and it causes all kinds of problems because they don't realize that unconsciously they think they're a better cook than she is, or they're a better housekeeper than she is, or they have better aesthetic abilities than she has, or they can
Right.
they look better in their clothes than she does. And of course this causes all kinds of problems in a relationship, right? Because what do you mean? Who's the woman here, right? But it goes the other way too in relationships, because oftentimes then the woman, she's going to compete in the masculine areas and compete with him. So when you have a relationship, and John Sanford said this real well. He wrote a book on it called The Invisible Partners. We have these invisible partners, and we have our conscious personality, and then we have the same-sex shadow with all the qualities we don't like. And then we have the opposite sex archetype, and that one's involved too. So in any set of lovers, it looks like there's only two people, but there are really at least 6 personalities that are engaging each other in any relationship. And that doesn't even mention the archetypal dimension.
Wow.
Which is, when the archetypes get involved, then we're really in for an interesting experience. And that's why mythology is so important, because that's what mythology is about. Folk tales are all about. They're about these unconscious processes where the archetypes, or the gods or goddesses, embody in people, and what happens when that happens. And so if you know the mythology, it really helps with the interpretation of dreams. The old man who started the Jung Institute in Los Angeles said that when you're first generation coming from one culture, you always dream in the mythology of that culture. said Irishmen would always bring Irish dreams. And he said, and even in the second generation, that would commonly be the case. But he said, what he discovered in the third generation was that there was a change. And in the third generation, he said about a third of all the dreams that he analyzed here in the United States, there were always Native American motifs. And he said that's why it's so important to be aware. Yeah. I'm not being able to bring up his name exactly right now, but his, this was a lecture he gave back in 1979 at the Jung Club in Orange County at Chapman College.
Wow.
He was 84 years old.
Wow. Well, yeah. Well, this archetypal mythological dimension of dream too, and this is a very rich area for discussion itself, and I think something that we can maybe talk about on another go round and really get into it.
Okay.
But even this hint of it, and talking about these different sort of projective webs that we fall into, as you mentioned, especially in relationships, I think explains a lot about what is the most common thing in the world, which is discord in interpersonal relationships. And I think provides the idea that the dream provides a portal to figuring that out. Now, in terms of your role, you mentioned before something to me about that I hadn't thought of, and I know you're not a huge fan of the sort of paint by numbers dream interpretation popular books that you see out there, but you were, and with good reason, but you were telling me something about the word interpret and what it really means and your role as an interpreter of dreams. Can you tell me about that?
I was doing some more research, which I keep on doing. I was reading Aldo Carotenuto's book called The Spiral Way, and he said that and he's Italian. He said that interpretation, which is a Latin word, the root is Latin, it means to move things around. And so I popped open my Oxford Universal Dictionary, and sure enough, that's what it means, to spread around. So as an interpreter of dreams, I get a chance to hear the dream, and then I move the images around a bit. For example, when I first met you, I asked you, what did you associate with the images in the dream? Because the dreamer is the only one who knows what the dream is really about, and they're his or her images. So the first, you provide more data. There's the raw data of the dream. It's a story usually, and they're interactive pieces. But in order to understand the characters, we have to ask questions of the dreamer. What exactly does this person? What are this person's characteristics, or how are you in relationship with this person in real life? Because the dream image is not the person in real life. The dream image is using that person's characteristics and visage, so to speak, to communicate with the dreamer. And that's what the dream is all about. So we get the personal associations, and then we can ask for bigger associations after that. And then I get to move those around a bit, by calling your attention to certain things. I'm rearranging the storyline of the dream in a certain way, and then that provides the dreamer one of these, oh, I get it. I never thought of that. Or we call it an aha reaction. And the dream interpreter doesn't know that he's hit pay dirt until there's an aha. Because, I don't know what it means to you. I have some idea what it might possibly mean, but until I rearrange the pieces and ask you to consider this or that or the other thing, that's the interpretation. Then if I get an aha, then I know that it's resonating with the dreamer. The dreamer is getting some insight here, and that's what the whole point of it is. And teaching the dreamer to interpret his or her own dreams is ultimately where this is supposed to go. And frequently, you need to share your dreams with another person just to hear them, but it isn't always necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Marie-Louise von Franz said that it doesn't really matter. The dreams are doing the healing at night. So whether you remember them or not is really not that important. The reason you want to remember your dreams and you want to interact with your dreams and you want to share your dreams with an analyst or a dream consultant is to speed the process of growth up. It's a spiritual process. We're evolving spiritually, and you can go the slow route or you can go the fast route. The slow route is not remembering your dreams. The fast route is remembering your dreams and talking to somebody about them. Mm. And you can add other substances like various medicines, like in the Native Americans do. You add peyote to that, or you add mushrooms to that, or you, like the South Americans, you add ayahuasca to that, which are neurotransmitter enhancers, and you speed up the process even more. But you definitely have to keep a journal, so there's some objective container for these dreams. And because if you don't keep a journal and keep track of these things, they just kind of fall by the wayside. There's always the opportunity to go back and reread a dream, and there'll be something you didn't think about in there. And it's amazing when you think about it sometimes, is that it's all there. And in fact, usually in the very first dream someone shares, their whole psychological profile, the prognosis, everything is in the dream. That's why we always pay very close attention to the first dreams that we're told, because it's like, here in a nutshell is everything I'm working on. Help! Help me with this. That's what the dream is saying, right?
Yeah.
Here's all the problems. Here's all the pieces. Can you rearrange them a little bit so this stupid conscious personality called my ego can figure this out for me? Because I'm having a really hard time getting his attention.
Well, it makes sense given the way that you outlined it before, that this process of bringing the unconscious together with the conscious mind would need a little bit of help, one way or the other, that it's not just going to happen by itself, that it does take effort and it does take perspective and assistance, because, of course, if they're operating by extremes and compensation, then they're in some ways at odds. So to be brought together, and that aha moment when it does happen that you described, I can attest, it's more than just an insight. You get an insight about the specific thing, but it's more than just an insight. It's also a feeling of suddenly being connected. Both sides of you being connected, and the more of those there are, the more it happens. And then that's not something you get from picking up a book at the supermarket that says, a dream about a seahorse means you're going to win the lottery.
Right. That aha is kind of what it feels like to me when I have those moments. It's almost like a psychic puzzle piece fit together. And suddenly the picture, the overall picture is beginning to emerge. That's what it is for me. And that's another thing that we could talk about sometime is how the I Ching has a similar function to the dreams. How consulting the Chinese oracle of the I Ching is very similar, but it's a different approach, because with imagery like the I Ching, there's certain things that kind of pop out at you. But the way that it's approached is completely at random. You're throwing coins 6 times, and then you puzzle that out in a book. And you've got a matrix, and you look at the matrix, and you read what people have written about this for thousands of years, and then you go, oh my God, how did that happen? I can't believe that. But it basically what it seems to be is it's like the unconscious lays the projection out on the words, so to speak, and then it bounces back at you. So it's a lot like a dream. The dream has all these interrelationships, and the imagery, for example, in the I Ching has similar kind of interrelationships. It's usually about forces of nature or people that do certain kinds of things, or relationships between people, or how to resolve certain problems. And so it's easy to project your problems and situation with people onto the text and then get something out of it by reading the text. But sometimes it has even more remarkable things that happen. And we could talk about that in detail at another time.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting to a lot of people, because divination, I Ching or tarot or that sort of thing is very popular, and it often brings with it that question of how in the world is this working? It seems to be working. So think about it in terms of using projection for fun and profit instead of for being led around in circles. Very interesting thought. Well, is there anything else you want to mention just now before we sign off here? It's been a very fruitful, I think, introduction to this idea, and lots to think about.
Well, the only thing I was thinking of was that dreams feed me. That's why I find them so exciting. There's a psychic dimension in my whole personality which feels enriched when I get to hear someone's dream and talk with them about things. And so that's the beauty of dream interpretation, is that it sustains my belief in the ability of every human being to rise to their greatest potential. And all the tools are built into us. All we have to do is access them. And that's the beauty of it for me.
Always a pleasure talking with you. I've already got my head spinning about all sorts of directions to take my own thoughts. I look forward to the next chapter. Plenty more to talk about. Thanks again for chatting, and so long to everyone listening.
Thanks very much, Riley. It's my pleasure.